If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The late winter wind moved across the valley with a steady, cutting cold, the kind that kept most people indoors if they had a home to return to. Elias Ward had no one waiting for him, so he stayed on the trail, leading his last surviving horse along the narrow path beside the frozen creek. He had been out since dawn, checking old trap lines and trying to gather whatever he could before the weather worsened again. Supplies were low, and the small cabin he lived in, an abandoned line shack he repaired himself, offered little comfort beyond a roof and a stove. Elias was used to loneliness. It kept him steady. It kept his mind quiet. His wife and 2 boys had died from fever years earlier. The drought that followed took the ranch he built with his father. After that, wandering felt easier than staying, and the cabin he found in these hills became a place to sleep rather than a home. His main task now was simple survival: enough food, enough firewood, enough reason to wake up the next morning. He spotted the shape near the water by accident. At first, it looked like a broken branch caught in the snow, but the stillness of it felt wrong. He tightened his grip on the reins, approached slowly, and crouched down as soon as he saw the truth. It was a young Apache girl, maybe 17 or 18, collapsed on her side, breath shallow and fast. Her leg was torn open from knee to thigh, the blood frozen in dark crusts where it met the snow. Her clothing was torn, her hair matted with dirt and ice. Someone had gone after her hard. That much was clear from the way the tracks around her were scattered and deep. Elias felt a quick spike of alarm. Injured Apaches meant danger of every kind. Warriors searching for her, soldiers chasing them, or the girl herself waking in panic and striking at him. But she wasn't moving. Her eyelids trembled, then slowly opened, and he saw fear there first, followed by confusion and the instinct to pull away. He raised both hands slightly. "Easy," he said, voice low and steady. "I'm not here to harm you." The girl swallowed, her throat tight with pain. She tried to push herself upright, but her arms shook immediately. Elias moved closer, staying on her left side where she could see him, and glanced again at the wound. If he left her here, she would die before nightfall. He didn't know her story yet, but her condition made the choice for him. He felt the knot of stress tighten in his chest. Helping her meant trouble. Not helping her meant watching someone die when he could stop it. His jaw tightened as he made the decision. "We're leaving," he murmured. "I've got a cabin not far." He lifted her carefully. She stiffened with pain, her fingers digging into his coat, but she didn't fight him. That told him she had gone too long without help. He guided her onto his horse's back, holding her steady while she caught her breath. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, wide and wary. She didn't trust him, she didn't know him, but she understood he was trying to keep her alive. "What's your name?" Elias asked as he adjusted the saddle blanket around her injured leg. Her voice came out strained. "Nah." He nodded once. "You'll be all right, Nah. Hold on." He tugged the reins and began walking, his boots sinking deep into the snow with each step. The wind kept picking up, but he kept his pace steady. He checked on her often, watching her eyelids flutter and her jaw clench against the pain. She looked exhausted, scared, and caught between wanting to trust him and wanting to stay guarded. As they moved deeper into the valley, Elias felt his mind tighten around every choice he made. How fast to walk, how to keep her balanced, how much distance remained until they reached shelter. Each decision felt heavier than usual. He wasn't only responsible for himself anymore. By the time they reached the cabin, Naha's head had slumped against his shoulder. Elias lifted her down with careful, practiced hands, carried her inside, and laid her on a narrow bed near the stove. Her fingers clutched at his sleeve for a moment, an involuntary reaction, born from fear that he might leave her alone again. He stoked the fire, heated water, and knelt beside her with a cloth. "This will hurt," he warned. Naha didn't respond, but her eyes tightened. When the warm water hit the wound, she jerked once, jaw locked. Elias worked fast, removing bits of dried blood and dirt, his hands steady despite the tension running through him. He wrapped her leg with the cleanest cloth he had, wishing he had more supplies. When he finished, she let out a slow breath and leaned her head back. You helped me, she whispered, the words thin but clear. You were dying, he replied. Didn't see another choice. He stood, uncertain of what came next. His life had been simple for years, quiet routines, no attachments, no risks. But now a wounded Apache girl lay in his bed, needing more than bandages. She needed safety, food, protection, decisions he hadn't planned for. He watched her eyelids close and felt the weight of responsibility settle around him. Outside, the wind kept pushing against the cabin walls. Inside, the first fragile moment of trust hung in the still air between them. The cabin stayed quiet until the first thin light of morning pressed through the gaps in the shutters. Elias opened his eyes at the sound of Naha shifting on the bed. Her breathing was stronger now, steady enough that he knew she would make it through the day if she kept resting. He pushed himself up, cautious not to startle her, and added 2 more logs to the stove. The warmth spread slowly through the room, melting the last thin layer of frost clinging to the window frame. Naha watched him as he worked, alert but calmer than she had been the night before. She studied his movements, trying to understand him. Her leg was swollen, but the bleeding had stopped. When he poured water into a tin cup and held it out, she hesitated only a second before taking it. Your bandage will need changing later, he said quietly. You'll walk again, but not soon. She lowered her gaze, absorbing the information without frustration. She seemed used to making plans based on pain, not comfort. After a long moment, she spoke. Men were chasing me, she murmured. 3 of them. Elias nodded once. The scattered tracks around the creek had already told him enough to guess that she hadn't simply fallen. Now he understood why she had pushed herself so far. She shifted to sit up straighter, trying to hide the strain it caused her. They wanted to take me, she added, her voice tight but controlled. Elias didn't ask why. He sensed she wouldn't answer yet. Instead, he stepped outside to check the horses, though only one remained. His last horse was tied near the woodpile, eating through the small patch of hay he had brought out the night before. The quiet morning made every sound sharper. The crunch of snow under his boots, the slow chewing of the animal, the distant rustle of wind across the ridge. He scanned the valley instinctively. Tracks from a night before were still clear, and nothing moved in the tree line. Still, the sense of risk lingered. If those men were still looking for Naha, they could come this way. He considered the possibilities, running through them with the same cautious discipline he used for everything else. The girl couldn't defend herself. The cabin was sturdy but small. Escape paths were limited. Inside, Naha tried to stand. The pain drove her back to the edge of the bed, jaw tight. Elias returned just in time to see her frustration. Don't push it, he said. You'll tear the wound open. She looked away, embarrassed to appear weak in front of him. Elias understood the instinct. Showing weakness had cost him dearly in his past. Neighbors had taken advantage when his ranch was failing, traders had underpaid him when he was desperate, and grief had left him exposed to choices he regretted for years. Helping her stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. He turned toward the window when he sensed a shift in the air. It wasn't sound at first, more a change in the weight of the morning. The horse lifted its head. Naha's hand tightened around the blanket. Something was out there. Elias reached for the rifle leaning near the door, opened it a crack, and stepped out. The cold hit him sharply, but he ignored it, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. 2 figures stood between the pines, still, silent, watching the cabin. Their silhouettes were unmistakable. Apache women, both older than Naha, both armed. He lowered the rifle slightly, but didn't sling it over his shoulder. He wanted them to see he wasn't aiming at them, but he wasn't foolish enough to leave himself exposed. The taller one stepped forward. Her posture was strict, her expression unreadable. We track our sister, she said in steady English. She is here. Elias nodded once and stepped aside so they could see Naha through the open door. The tension in their shoulders eased only a little. They approached slowly, eyes fixed on him while they crossed the snow. Their steps were silent, practiced. Inside the cabin, Naha straightened. Her breath caught at the sight of them, relief mixed with shame that she had needed rescue. The older sister touched her face gently, a quick assessment of her injuries, then turned toward Elias. You helped her, she said. There was no warmth in her tone yet, just a statement of fact. She wouldn't have survived the night, Elias answered. The second sister circled the room, taking in every detail. The bandages, the water basin, the stove, the traces of blood he had cleaned from the floor. She studied Elias with the same intensity she used for threats, yet she didn't raise her bow or her voice. Ahina, the older one, spoke again. We followed her trail in the dark. We saw men searching. You led her away from them. Elias stayed still. She needed help. That's all. Sani, the younger sister, crossed her arms. You touched her wounds. You carried her. You gave your horse. Her tone held something sharper, confusion or suspicion, maybe both. Elias met her stare without flinching. I wasn't letting her die. Naha watched the exchange carefully, eyes moving between the three of them. Her fingers tightened around the blanket again. She forced her voice out, steadying it. He carried me because I could not walk. He stopped the bleeding. He stayed awake. Ahina studied Elias again, searching for any sign of deceit. She found none. Her shoulders relaxed by a small margin. We thank you, she said. But danger may follow her. Those men might return. We must decide where to go. Elias considered the truth he had been pushing aside since dawn. If the men came this way, 3 women and an injured one would not be enough to hold the cabin. He understood the terrain better than they did. He knew safer paths and places where tracks vanished quickly. You shouldn't stay long, Elias said. If you travel, I can guide you part of the way. There's a narrow pass east of here, harder to follow. The offer seemed to surprise all 3 sisters. Naha's gaze softened, the first sign of trust since he found her by the creek. Ahina exchanged a look with Sani, a silent conversation unfolding between them. Elias didn't interrupt. They carried authority differently than he did, calm, deliberate, unhurried. After a moment, Ahina nodded. You will walk with us, she said. It wasn't a question. Elias felt the decision settle in his chest. The trail ahead would be longer, colder, and far more dangerous than anything he faced alone. Yet he didn't resist. Something about leaving the cabin with them, about keeping Naha safe, felt necessary in a way he couldn't fully explain. He gathered his coat, checked the rifle, and stepped outside with the same steady calm he had used the night before. The sisters followed. The journey had already begun. None of them said it aloud. Naha watched him prepare, her expression steady, carrying quiet gratitude she didn't try to hide. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel alone. They left the cabin before the sun climbed fully over the ridge. The cold was sharp enough to sting the lungs, but the quiet around them felt steady, as if the valley had paused to watch them move. Elias walked beside Naha's horse, one hand lightly on the reins to keep her balanced. Ahina and Sani led the way, scanning the tree line with disciplined attention. They kept a slow pace to protect Naha's leg, but even that pace strained her strength. Every few steps, she tightened her jaw, doing her best not to show how much it hurt. Elias noticed every shift in her breathing. He watched her carefully, adjusting the reins whenever she leaned too far to one side. He didn't speak unless necessary, but his steady presence gave her enough confidence to stay upright. She did not ask for rest, yet he called for breaks when her fingers trembled from gripping the saddle. They stopped near a cluster of pines, the branches thick enough to hide them from anyone scanning the open valley. Ahina crouched to examine the snow behind them. No tracks followed. Still, she kept her bow in her hand. We move east, she said. The pass is narrow, hard to enter without sound. Elias nodded, and the ground stays firmer. Less risk of slipping. Sani glanced at him, measuring his knowledge. She had been cautious with him from the start, but she no longer watched him as if he might betray them. Instead, she studied him in a way that suggested she was trying to understand his motives. No one gave up a horse in winter without reason. No one carried responsibility they didn't have to carry unless something inside them needed to. Naha reached for a tin cup as Elias handed her water. Her hand wavered slightly, so he steadied the cup for her. Their eyes met for a brief moment. quick, quiet, but meaningful enough that Ahina noticed. The older sister didn't react outwardly, yet Elias sensed her weighing the look. As they prepared to continue, Ahina spoke without turning. What did you see on the trail when you found her? Elias adjusted his coat. 2 sets of boot tracks. 1 horse. They weren't traveling together for long. Looked like a pursuit. Sani stepped closer. You know the land. You know how they move. Long enough around these hills to read signs, he answered. Ahina seemed to accept this, and some unspoken tension eased. She had wanted confirmation of something she already suspected, that the danger wasn't behind them because of him. The danger existed before he ever touched Naha's wounds. They walked again, deeper into the pines. Snow cracked underfoot in muted rhythms. Elias stayed near Naha, noting every detail that might cause trouble. A slanted patch of ice, a low branch, the faint sound of running water beneath the frozen surface. He guided the horse gently, keeping her steady without drawing attention to the effort. Naha's eyes drifted between her sisters and Elias. She seemed torn between wanting to say more and holding on to her silence. Pain clouded her features, but behind it was something clearer. She trusted the man walking beside her. She trusted his pace, his steady hand, and the way he never looked at her with pity. As midday approached, the trees thinned. The view opened to a slope that led toward a narrow cut in the ridgeline. Elias stopped abruptly and lifted his hand. The sisters froze. Even Naha tensed, though she did not yet understand what he had sensed. He crouched and brushed snow away from the ground. A single track, shallow but fresh, cut across the slope. Not theirs. Someone had passed within the last hour. Ahina tightened her grip on her bow. How many? Just one, Elias replied. Walking, moving fast. Naha shifted uneasily in the saddle. The memory of her pursuers had not faded. Elias looked up at her, his voice steady. We can move above the trail, he said. Ridge keeps us hidden. They won't see us unless they climb. Ahina glanced toward the rocks, gauging their path. She cannot climb now. I'll carry her if it comes to that, Elias said without hesitation. Naha's breath caught, not from pain, but from the sudden weight of his words. Her sisters exchanged a quick glance, silent but telling. They understood he meant it. They followed his plan, cutting toward the higher ground. Elias kept one hand on the horse, and one steadying Naha's leg as the slope grew steeper. When the terrain forced them to dismount, Naha held onto Elias's shoulder, trying to take her own weight, but failing. He lifted her carefully, anchoring her against him as he climbed. Her breath brushed against his collar, uneven but trusting. She tightened her arms around him, not out of weakness, but out of necessity. When they reached the higher shelf of rock, he set her down gently beside a pine trunk. Ahina and Sani watched the valley below. After several minutes, a lone rider moved along the lower trail, scanning the snow as if searching for something he had lost. The man did not look up. He kept riding west, unaware he had passed beneath 4 pairs of eyes. When he disappeared into the trees, Ahina let out a controlled breath. We continue, she said quietly. The further we go, the safer she will be. Elias helped Naha back onto the horse. She rested her hand briefly on his wrist, a small gesture of gratitude she did not try to hide. It stayed between them, steady, warm, honest. Sani noticed. She didn't speak, but her expression softened. They moved on, deeper into the pass, sheltered by rock and pine. For the first time since sunrise, Elias felt that they were no longer running from danger, but moving towards something more certain, something that felt like a destination instead of an escape. And Naha, leaning slightly toward him as the horse walked, held the same quiet conviction. The path ahead was difficult, but she no longer feared it, not with him guiding each step. The sun dipped behind the ridge long before they reached level ground again. The narrow pass gave way to a small clearing sheltered by leaning slabs of stone, enough space for a fire and a temporary camp. The air grew colder with each minute, sharp enough to numb fingers if left uncovered. Elias gathered dry branches from beneath the pines while Ahina and Sani checked the surrounding slopes for signs of movement. Naha remained on the horse until Elias returned. "We'll rest here," he said gently. Naha nodded, though her face showed the strain of the long day. Elias helped her down, supporting her weight as her injured leg buckled. She leaned into him without hesitation this time. Her fingers held his coat tightly until he eased her toward a place near the stone wall where she could sit without slipping. Ahina approached, kneeling beside her sister. She inspected the bandage and the swelling, then met Elias's eyes. "Change it," she said. It wasn't a command born of mistrust, but of practicality. He had treated the wound once. He understood its current condition best. Elias heated water over the fire. Naha tried to steady her breathing, preparing herself. She didn't look away when he returned. When he peeled the cloth back, she gripped Ahina's hand, her jaw clenched. The wound was still angry and raw, but it was clean. Elias worked fast, his movements deliberate. Naha let out a shaky breath when it was over. "You're healing," he said, adjusting the fresh bandage. "You'll walk soon if you stay careful." She held his gaze for a moment, her eyes calm despite the pain. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod, but inside he felt a weight he hadn't acknowledged fully. Protecting her had become more than an obligation. Every decision he made on the trail revolved around keeping her safe, and he no longer questioned it. The fire crackled softly as evening settled. Sani prepared a small meal from dried meat and roots she carried in her pack. Elias shared what little he had left. Hunger wasn't something he spoke about, but Naha noticed the way he pushed more of his portion toward her, pretending it didn't matter. She didn't question him. She simply accepted the offer with quiet gratitude. When the meal was finished, Ahina finally broke the silence that had lingered between them all day. "Why do you live alone in these hills?" she asked. Elias poked at the fire, weighing how much to reveal. The truth wasn't complicated, but speaking it reminded him of everything he'd tried to leave behind. "I had a family," he said. "Lost them to sickness years ago. The ranch failed after that. I needed distance from everything I couldn't fix." Ahina watched him carefully. She wasn't judging him, only trying to understand the man who had stepped into their path and changed their journey. "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm just trying to live through the season," he replied. "The cabin is enough for that." Naha listened closely. Something in his voice drew her attention more than the words themselves. She saw the weight he carried, not from danger, but from years of walking without purpose. Sani shifted her seat closer to the fire. "You said the man below us was alone," she said. "Could there be more?" Elias nodded. "Possible, but he didn't know your exact path. Following the ridge should keep us ahead of anyone else." Ahina considered this. "We will reach our people in 2 days if the weather stays clear." Naha lowered her gaze. The idea of returning home brought a mix of relief and uncertainty. She had endured more than her sisters knew. Facing her band again meant answering questions she wasn't ready to speak aloud. Elias noticed the tension in her shoulders. "You're safe with them," he said quietly. She lifted her eyes. "I know, but I don't know if I am the same." Elias didn't respond, but his expression softened. Ahina and Sani exchanged a glance, realizing this was not only a physical recovery, but something deeper. The bond growing between Naha and Elias was not loud or dramatic. It lived in the way she looked at him, in how he steadied her without hesitation, and in the silence they shared without discomfort. Night settled fully. The fire threw warm light along the stone walls. Ahina took first watch, perched silently near the edge of the clearing. Sani curled close to her sister, eyes drifting between Naha and Elias, as if trying to understand the quiet connection forming. Naha lay back against the saddle blanket Elias had placed beneath her. Her breathing eased for the first time since they'd left the cabin. Elias sat close to the fire, sharpening a small knife, not as preparation for trouble, but to stay alert. He kept her in the corner of his vision, listening to the rhythm of her breaths, making sure it stayed steady. When her eyes opened again, she studied him through the firelight. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The moment held the simple truth that he would not leave her, no matter what the next day brought. The wind softened around the clearing as if the valley itself had paused again, giving them a quiet space to rest before the journey continued. The morning rose gray and cold, but the air felt calmer than the days before. The fire had burned low during the night, and Elias stirred it back to life while the sisters prepared for the final stretch of the journey. Naha tried to sit up on her own, testing her strength. Her leg hurt, but the pain no longer controlled her. She could lift herself without collapsing. Elias noticed the small victory and gave a single approving nod. They set out once the light was strong enough to see the path clearly. The ridge sloped downward toward a wide valley where smoke trails from distant lodges rose thinly into the sky. That sight alone told the sisters they were close to their people. Naha stared at it with mixed emotions: relief, fear of questions, and the uncertainty of how she would be received after disappearing during the raid. Elias walked beside her, as always, guiding the horse over uneven patches. The ground leveled as they descended, and soon the snow had thinned enough to show dirt beneath. Ahina and Sani moved faster now, recognizing familiar ground. They signaled Elias to slow the horse, giving Naha time to gather herself before arriving. When they reached the edge of the camp, several Apache men approached with raised hands, not in threat, but in recognition. Ahina spoke to them in her language, explaining what had happened. Elias could not understand the words, but he understood the tone: steady, respectful, and clear. The men stepped aside, allowing them to pass. Children ran to greet the sisters, then fell quiet when they saw Naha's injury. A few women came forward, their faces tightening with concern as they helped her down from the horse. Naha wobbled, but Elias steadied her with a hand at her waist until the others reached her. For a moment, she didn't move. Her hand remained on Elias's arm, holding a little too long, as if letting go meant losing something important. Ahina gently touched her shoulder. "You are home," she said. Naha inhaled slowly, then released Elias and allowed her sisters to guide her toward the healing lodge. As she walked away, she looked back once, just long enough to let him know she wanted him to stay nearby. Elias stood alone at the edge of the gathering. The people watched him with caution, weighing his intentions. He didn't blame them. A stranger who arrived with an injured girl after a chase was not easily trusted. A man with gray streaks in his braids approached. His expression was measured. "You brought her back alive," he said. "You kept her safe." Elias nodded. "She deserved the chance." The man studied him. "You will stay until she can stand without pain. After that, your path is yours to decide." It was more acceptance than Elias expected. He gave a quiet thanks and stepped back as the tribe tended to Naha. Sani approached him briefly, her posture softer than before. "She feared she would not return," she said. "You kept her alive. That will not be forgotten." Elias didn't answer. He watched the lodge where Naha had been taken, feeling a heaviness settle in his chest. Not from sadness, but from the sudden emptiness of not having her beside him on the trail. Time passed. The sun climbed higher. People moved about their tasks. Elias waited. When Naha emerged again, she walked slowly with support from Ahina. Her leg was wrapped in fresh linens, and the color had returned to her face. She saw Elias immediately and dismissed her sisters with a small gesture. They stepped back to give her space. Naha approached him carefully. Her steps were uneven, but she no longer looked fragile. "You stayed," she said quietly. Elias met her eyes. Didn't seem right to leave. A small breath escaped her, almost like relief. She took one more step toward him. "My sisters say you can travel with us if you choose. Not far, but not alone." Elias felt something shift inside him, something he had pushed aside for years. The wandering, the silence of the cabin, the weight of memories that never left. None of it had purpose anymore. Helping Naha had given him a path again, one that did not end with the cabin walls. "I'll stay," he said, "if that's what you want." Naha didn't hesitate. "It is." Her hand reached for his, steady despite her weakness. Elias closed his fingers around hers with the same quiet certainty he had shown since the moment he found her by the frozen creek. Ahina and Sani watched from a distance, their expressions calm. They understood what was forming between the two of them, something built not on words but on endurance, patience, and the simple decision to remain by each other's side. The wind moved gently through the valley, carrying the faint sound of voices from the camp. Life continued, and for the first time in years, Elias felt he was part of it rather than passing through. Naha leaned against him, not because she needed support, but because she chose to. Together, they stepped toward the camp, toward a shared future that no longer held fear or uncertainty. The journey had brought them here, and it ended not with separation, but with belonging.